Great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that is joining us live for our webinar, and special welcome to anyone watching this on demand as well. Today's webinar is to go over managing compliance and change in a time of global uncertainty. And my name is Brian Federley. I'm a member of our expert services team, specifically our risk and resilience division here at ServiceNow, where I work as a senior business process consultant. I've got 5 years of ServiceNow experience in our ecosystem, as well as cross-functional risk experience. And my areas of specialization are integrated risk management, third-party risk management, and regulatory change. And I'm based out of Surprise, Arizona. Dave, if you want to go ahead with an introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hello everyone, Edgile. I'm a managing director at Edgile. Edgile is a Wipro company, and we specialize exclusively in ServiceNow risk and security operations. So a lot of this ability to manage regulatory compliance falls within ServiceNow's IRM GRC solution. And I come with 10 years of functional experience in this domain, as well as 6+ years on ServiceNow. So great to be here with everyone. Mike?
Thank you. I'm Mike Cowan. I'm one of the senior regulatory intelligence experts at Thomson Reuters, providing news, information, analysis on financial services regulation, particularly for the Thomson Reuters regulatory intelligence product. I'm based in the UK. I've got 35 years of experience of risk compliance and internal audit in the financial services sector, where I worked for the UK regulators and retail banking organizations.
All right, thanks, Mike. Yeah, before we get into it, let's just take a moment to talk about the agenda for today's session. We got through our introductions. We're going to start by talking about the current state of global regulatory compliance. Then we're going to move to compliance and regulatory change management. And then our last primary topic will be, how RegTech is impacting risk and compliance management. And we've got some time at the end where we'll have open Q&A. So as we're going through, please make sure to submit any questions for Q&A. We'll actively be monitoring those, and we'll try to cover as much as we can during that open Q&A time at the end. So to kick us off, really the compliance landscape is complex and evolving. It's changing very quickly, and it has the potential to carry huge fines. And I think, as we're all aware, compliance remains a top priority at the board level of organizations globally. One of the most significant trends we've been witnessing in the compliance landscape is a greater focus on data protection and cybersecurity. As companies are becoming more digitized, data privacy and security concerns have become increasingly important, and regulators are taking notice. In response, we're seeing compliance teams are implementing stricter data protection protocols and investing heavily in cybersecurity technologies to help mitigate risk. Another trend we're seeing is the increased use of compliance tech and automation. With the growing complexity of regulations, companies are turning to technology to help them streamline compliance processes and reduce the likelihood of errors or oversights. Compliance tech can help to automate routine tasks, monitor compliance risks, and ensure that companies stay up to date with regulatory changes. Anti-money laundering, or AML, regulations are also becoming more stringent. We're seeing regulators ramping up efforts to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, some of the fallout from the war in Ukraine, and companies are under increasing pressure to ensure that their AML programs are effective and up to date. Compliance teams are investing in AML tech to help them identify and monitor suspicious activities and to comply with complex reporting requirements. We're also seeing ethical and social responsibility becoming increasingly important in the compliance landscape. Companies are recognizing the importance of incorporating ethical considerations into their decision-making processes and are developing social responsibility programs to address issues such as human rights, labor practices, and environmental sustainability. Compliance teams are playing a key role in ensuring that these programs are compliant with relevant laws and regulations. And as mentioned, going off of that, stricter environmental regulations are also emerging as a trend in the compliance landscape, with climate change being of growing concern, and regulators are implementing new environmental regulations to address it. Compliance teams are working to ensure that companies are in compliance with these regulations, aren't investing in environmental compliance tech to help them monitor and reduce their environmental impact. And speaking of how costly non-compliance can be, looking just at in 2022, the SEC collected $6.4 billion in penalties and disgorgement just in that year alone. And looking at the bottom there, we're seeing $8 billion being the amount that financial institutions were fined for AML-related infractions, bringing that total quantity to $56.1 billion in the time period post-2007, 2008. So this is definitely of great concern. I think we have our very first poll question here. So this should have just popped up on everyone's screen. So the question we have for our audience today is, in an average week, we're curious, how much time does your compliance team spend tracking and analyzing regulatory developments? And this answer is going to be in hours. So that should have popped up. We're able to see as results come in. And just as a reminder, while we're filling out our first poll question, if at any point during the webinar, if you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A panel on your screen. Also, you can access and download resources in the resources panel at the bottom of your screen. We'd also appreciate it if you could please submit the survey that you'll see at the very end of the webinar. Okay, we have about a third of you have submitted. We'll give it a little more time. I'm curious, J. Mike, what do you think is going to be the top answer here?
Well,
yeah, it's kind of hard to just go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, if I just give you a preview of what's coming up, in the Thomson Reuters cost of compliance survey, generally speaking, between 1 and 7 hours people spend tracking on a weekly basis. Maybe it's just slanted towards 1 to 3, but I think it'll be in that sort of region. Jay,
Okay.
sorry, I think I interrupted.
No, that's pretty much where I was going as well, Mike. So.
Okay, last chance. Give it another 10 seconds here if you want to get your responses in before you look at the results. Okay, gonna go ahead and shut it down. Okay, it looks like we have a pretty even distribution here. Top result being that the quantity of time the compliance teams are spending tracking and analyzing that regulatory developments is actually more than 10 hours per week. So the content we're going to go over today definitely will be relevant. But we see a fairly even distribution. Some teams less than 1 hour, about a quarter also said 1 to 3 hours. Not so much in that mid-range, but definitely looks like more than 10 is our clear winner. All right. So
That's interesting.
Yeah. So Mike, I'll throw this over to you. But as we kind of introduced, the number of regulations and the speed at which they're changing is increasing. Would you like to share your thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And actually, I'm just going to support your previous slides, firstly, because from a UK perspective, the Financial Conduct Authority, one of the two main regulators here in the UK, issued fines to financial services firms totaling approximately £216 million in 2022. And in tandem with your previous slide, this has covered a wide range of areas. Yes, absolutely can't disagree with the areas that you hit upon. But financial crime absolutely was one of the larger subjects getting fined for money laundering, market abuse, etc. And the fines ranged to other areas like pensions, mis-selling, and governance failings. And the fines were not only for firms, but senior managers as well. I mean, we operate a senior managers regime for financial services firms here in the UK, and through that, individuals are actually being prosecuted and fined for misdemeanors. So just to underline what you've been saying about the importance of compliance with regulations these days. But onto these slides. So at Thomson Reuters, we undertake two main surveys aimed at compliance professionals on an annual basis. The first is our annual cost of compliance survey, and the second is our survey on fintech, regtech, and the role of compliance. And throughout this webinar, I'm going to draw data from each of these surveys. In fact, when it comes to cost of compliance, this year's survey has just closed. So the survey for 2023 has just closed. And so I'm going to give you a sneak peek at some of the results from that survey as well. So Thomson Reuters Regulatory Intelligence tracks over 1,300 regulatory bodies in 190 countries. And since 2008, we've been seeing an underlying increase in the number of regulatory alerts being issued by these regulators. In 2022, we saw over 61,000 regulatory alerts, which equates to around about 234 alerts daily. And this highlights the pressure that the compliance departments are under. Of course, not all of these alerts will apply to every firm, but the larger, more global institutions will have a significant percentage of these alerts to deal with. And for compliance departments to do their jobs, that's identifying the regulatory issue, assessing the main points, summarizing them and reporting them into the business. This takes time and resource, which can be of short supply. So moving to the next slide, this slide provides data from both cost of compliance reports, so 2022 and 2023. On the left-hand side, there are two Wordles that show the results from the 2022 survey. The Wordles show the results from when respondents were asked about the compliance challenges firms faced at board and at compliance officer level. And as you can see, responses in both questions, keeping up with regulatory change and the volume and implementation of regulatory change, were seen as key challenges. And this year's cost of compliance report showed a similar trend. There were over 350 participants from many locations around the world and covering multiple sectors, but it was mainly financial services. And we asked the same questions. This year, compliance officers still see the compliance officers identified the volume and implementation of regulatory change as the most popular challenge, whereas boards slightly differed this year, whereas they identified balancing cost pressures as the most popular. I mean, this undoubtedly reflects the current economic climate that we're in, but the boards still felt that keeping up with regulatory change was a significant challenge, and that was second in the list. On the right-hand side of the slide, we see the results from respondents when asked about what they expect the amount of information to be published by regulators. These results were from the 2023 Cost of Compliance Survey, the one that's just closed, and this report's due in the coming weeks. But again, as you can see, nearly 3/4 of respondents to this year's survey expected an increase in regulatory activity. This was reflected in the regional breakdown, where more than 70% of respondents in each area predicted that the amount of regulatory information published would increase in 2023. And I think at this point we hand over to Jay. Jay, what's your thoughts on all of this?
Actually, I think if I cover this one, then I think we'll go to Jay.
Okay, sorry, Michael.
All good. Yeah, so I just want to take a moment to kind of talk about a pathway to modernization for compliance. And in my day-to-day, I work with our customers on the implementation side. And one of the most important things we do, whether it's at the beginning of a project where we're taking inventory of, where are we today in the maturity life cycle, or it could be, road mapping towards the end, coming up with, where do we go from here? And we typically use the 5-point scale like this, where we're saying for your overall compliance program regarding kind of where do you stand today with how integrated or embedded it is to your culture, your processes, and also how are you utilizing technology? Are we pretty siloed? Are we separate? Are things, is it embedded in our processes? And it kind of starts with the first bucket, which is our ad hoc, where at this point, within an IRM or your compliance program, we're saying companies are managing compliance or risk in a reactive ad hoc manner. There's not a lot of coordination between the different departments, and compliance is often handled by, it could be individual teams or BUs, and this can lead to inconsistency within the practices and leaving gaps in your coverage. Moving to that second bucket on the maturity journey, is systemized, where once we get to this stage, we're implementing a structured and consistent approach to compliance. Companies are establishing that they've got formal processes, policies, procedures, and compliance is centralized under a dedicated team. This helps to ensure that compliance is managed consistently across the organization. In the middle there, we have optimized, where at this point, companies are utilizing technology for their compliance and risk programs, maybe leveraging data analytics to improve their compliance capabilities. Their investment in technology is showing in their tech and their systems, and it's being utilized to identify and prioritize compliance items, which is enabling companies to be more proactive rather than reactive in managing changes due to changes in regulations, and to help them respond more quickly to any emerging compliance events. The fourth one would be connected, where once we're in this connected stage, this is where we're integrating compliance management with other areas of the business. And this is helping to ensure that we're all aligned with the business objectives, and that compliance is managed in a holistic and coordinated manner. Companies would also engage with external stakeholders such as regulators, industry peers, to share best practices and stay up to date with any emerging items. And lastly, and this is the desired end state on that journey, is embedded. This is where it's our final stage, and we're making sure that we are embedding compliance into the culture and operations of the organization. It is not just the responsibility of the compliance team, but it is owned by all employees, and companies can use incentives and training programs to really promote that risk-aware culture and integrate compliance into their day-to-day operations. And we're gaining all the benefits of fully leveraging the technology systems and solutions to help with the overall compliance program. All right. So our next topic from the agenda is compliance and regulatory change management. And I'm going to throw this to Jay. We would say most people start by simply trying to implement the right requirements and create the right controls. What recommendations do you have for helping customers to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brian. So I think we can all agree that the internal management of regulatory compliance content is inefficient and time-consuming, especially with the ever-changing regulatory requirements that face organizations today. And we're seeing rapid changes and evolvement of these regulations, making sure that we're protecting the data, we're protecting our consumers in the way that we can. So we recommend leveraging content subscriptions where able. There are a number of them available on the ServiceNow store. Edgile is one of those content providers where we provide information technology, information security regulations for different industry verticals. And that can really help accelerate your journey and reduce the time spent on managing that. I suspect the folks who are saying they're spending 10 plus hours per week on regulatory compliance activities are likely the folks who are doing a lot of this activity internal today, where they're breaking down these regulations and mapping them to controls and risks so that they can find those efficiencies. I think everyone wants to get to an assess once, satisfy many model where able, because there is so much overlap between these different regulations. Once we've gotten that foundational control and risk framework, we can then start to look at leveraging regulatory change management workflows that can help us identify areas of our program that are impacted by these new and updated regulations. Ideally, we're focusing our attention on the areas of the business that need that attention, as opposed to having to do a top to bottom review with each new regulation. So looking at regulatory change impact assessments, how we're doing the source onboarding. Let's make sure that if we're onboarding a new regulatory source to the organization, that we're confident that it's applicable to the organization and that we want to impose this on our control owners to the business. Some of these activities can be very expensive, both from a resource perspective and from a technology cost to implement. So let's make sure that we're getting the right eyes and approvals on those elements. And we need to embrace the organizational change challenge here, recognizing that these things aren't overnight changes. And so looking for workflows that can help smooth that process out, getting to that optimized stage, getting to automated where able is ideal. So our last recommendation for folks who are maybe not doing this today is start looking at regulatory change annually, with the exception of those high criticality regulations that are coming into effect. You could spend months iteratively rebuilding your program if you're not taking a structured approach. So kind of avoid that burdensome activities where able, obviously taking a risk-based approach based on your organization, the relevant regulations. So, and I think on the next slide, Brian, here we have another poll question. So for the team and the audience here, what do you currently use to help manage regulatory change? So we have a few options here. So nothing in manual processes, some point solutions, compliance capability or regulatory change capabilities in your compliance solution, reg tech solutions, and other. So a lot of folks are filling this out. Just want to let you know that you do have the option to submit questions to the team through the Q&A. We have time at the end of the session to answer some of those. There are also some resources at the bottom of the screen that you can click into from both ServiceNow, Thomson Reuters, and Edgile, taking you to our respective web pages. And then lastly, there is a webinar survey that you're going to be asked to complete. You can do that at any time, but you can also do it towards the end of our session today. So looks like we're at about 30% here. I guess while we maybe give another 30, 60 seconds here. Mike, Brian, in your experience, what have you seen folks using for regulatory change within your respective engagements?
I would say I'm going to expect us to be a little heavier here, maybe options A and C, just from what I've seen with my customers.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think A and C. I think that the two slides previously, one of Brian's, one of Jay's, are very interesting, and where people sit on Brian's spectrum of where they are from ad hoc to embedded will be very interesting. I would suggest that they're more to the left-hand side of that slide than the right-hand side. That's certainly been in my experience. And I think you're absolutely right, Jay, when it comes to a structured approach. And the fundamentals are really just knowing what the regulations are. Sounds strange, sounds difficult, sounds easy, but in practice it's not. And actually getting your managers and your operational staff to understand that what regulations affect them, and the requirement to keep up to date with these is a management responsibility, not just a compliance responsibility.
No, absolutely. And that kind of, is this source applicable to us, is one of the most loaded questions that organizations face, especially with data privacy regulations. Usually it's around where the data subject resides, not where you as an organization have presence. So if you're working with consumer or patient information from the EU or California or wherever you are finding these patients, you need to comply with those regulations even though you don't have a physical presence. So there is a lot of complexity in this.
Yeah, it's very complicated. Very complicated.
All right, looks like we've got about half the team here who've submitted. So Brian, do we have the results? Yeah, a lot of manual, a lot of no existing process today. And I think, Brian, you were spot on. A and C were the two most common responses there. So hopefully our discussion today and some of the subsequent slides will help folks realize there are options to help find efficiencies in their program. So Mike, your latest survey states the greatest challenge faced by compliance teams is the volume and implementation of regulatory change. And it points to technological innovation and the need to continually reassess their technological and information needs. you want to maybe step the team through some of that?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I think you've touched on it in previous slides, Jay, but I will walk my thoughts through this. So the need to reassess technology and information needs, is frankly paramount in a changing environment. With volume and scope of regulations ever changing, the needs of the firm developing, technology available that is available ever improving, and the macroeconomic environment placing differing pressures on budgets, the requirement for compliance officers to actually keep assessing what their firms require is very important. And from the various Thomson Reuters surveys over the last couple of years, there is some data that supports why compliance officers should be looking at technological solutions more. On this slide, we have the responses to the questions: what is your view of innovation and digital disruption, and are RegTech solutions impacting how you manage compliance? Both of these questions were from last year's survey on FinTech, RegTech, and the role of compliance. And in that report, we commented that a slowdown was being seen in the wider FinTech marketplace compared to previous years. The main challenges that respondents identified were the availability of skills and the regulatory approach, which we've been chatting about. This aligns with the current economic conditions, and all these points together may have seen the FinTech marketplace contract a little. However, it doesn't seem to have dampened enthusiasm in the RegTech sector, where 78% of respondents indicated a positive response when asked about their views of innovation in RegTech. And as you can see from the slide, 50% of respondents said that RegTech was impacting the way they manage compliance. I mean, we have a slide later in the deck that goes into particular risk and compliance activities that RegTech solutions are being used for. But the survey also showed an increasing trend over the last few years of more respondents favoring external development, i.e. contractors and outsourced providers coming in to develop their RegTech solutions rather than developing a bespoke in-house solution. So I think this then moves me on to the benefits that that firms will gain from having RegTech solutions, and that compliance officers expect to see from a RegTech solution, and frankly, how Thomson Reuters can help in this mix. So in the FinTech, RegTech, and Role of Compliance report, when asked what respondents would like RegTech to be able to do for their firms, the most popular reply was to facilitate compliance functional tasks, that like horizon scanning, like training, like compliance functional tasks. And when asked about the benefits that were expected from financial technology in the next 12 months, increased efficiency and speed of processing was seen as the greatest benefit, with improved data management and improved customer satisfaction next. In fact, when asked about the one thing that respondents would like technological innovation to deliver in the next 12 months, better risk management tools and automation of processing were the top two, with improved tracking of regulatory change closely behind. And this is where Thomson Reuters regulatory intelligence comes in. Regulatory intelligence aims to promote the desire for increasing efficiency and improve tracking of regulatory change and solve the problems that are associated with these. So regulatory intelligence feeds and API provide a seamless process for firms to receive regulatory information, enabling your business to integrate and act upon all relevant risk data and use them for regulatory change and events analysis, risk and control assessments, and policy document reviews. We've already established that volume of regulatory material is expected to increase, and the range of subject areas is also increasing. So the pressures on compliance functions to identify, analyze, and report developments into their organizations is also increasing. So Thomson Reuters regulatory intelligence feeds and API feeds reduces research time by providing customized client profiles and search functionality so that you can get to the required regulatory developments that are pertinent to your firm. It ensures your organization can easily and securely integrate the most comprehensive and authoritative source of regulatory intelligence into your business's workflow processes. And this increases the scalability into those workflow solutions and also other third parties where necessary. And finally, it allows you to stay updated, providing an international perspective with regulatory alerts on a daily basis from over 1,300 regulators worldwide. So in summary, there is big benefit to technological solution, to RegTech involvement within compliance functionality, and there is a desire for it out there, and Thomson Reuters Regulatory Intelligence aims to plug that gap when it comes to horizon scanning and regulatory alerts.
So going off of what Mike was talking about and the value from Thomson Reuters, we can leverage that content within ServiceNow's regulatory change management application, which is a part of our IRM GRC suite of applications and comes included with a lot of our licenses for our users. But the regulatory change management application does exactly what it sounds like. It allows you to be proactive and reactive regarding any potential changes to your compliance environment by leveraging a subscription with Thomson Reuters, which we have a native out of the box integration capability with. If you have the licensing on their end, that content can seamlessly flow into ServiceNow, into our regulatory change management application, where we can establish the following features on the left, whether that is a standardized taxonomy, just to make sure that all of our terminology and everything is mapping correctly. Getting to the proactive piece, we can create what we call our regulatory alerts. And we have two different buckets for these. These can be an alert of, hey, here's a potential change that may be coming down the pipe. Your team can begin their preparation early to evaluate what would the impact, and what would the impact of that change, what would it be for your organization? Or once we have we call them our source document alerts, where the change has actually occurred. It is now represented in the underlying requirements from your authoritative sources that you are following. So once we have those alerts coming in, this can be content from Thomson Reuters, other paid providers. You can also leverage public RSS feeds, whatever your needs are, to make sure that you have exposure to all sources, you're receiving all the communications you need. So once those alerts have been received, we do the impact assessment. We then, after we determine, okay, this is relevant for us, what are our impacted items? What tweaks do we need to make to our potentially to our risks, our controls, our policies, anywhere that we want to make updates. We then have a structured workflow in the application for all things change management. And that's one of the powerful tools, is that kind of the last bullet there, is that as a part of our IRM/GRC suite, that we can leverage in those abilities, we can communicate with the other applications. So if we determine that these are our impacted objects, without having to leave the ServiceNow ecosystem, you can go directly to those applications, set up linkages and say, hey, these were impacted risks, controls, policies, authority documents, wherever the changes may be, that you can natively go in, make those updates, and have traceability to ensure that everything we said would get done actually gets done. And lastly, as you can see on the screenshot, it comes with a lot of helpful out-of-the-box dashboards, reports. It gives you easy access and drill-down capabilities to all the data involved in that end-to-end process.
Yeah, and Brian, on this point, there is a question in the Q&A here asking whether ServiceNow is providing the content into the IRM GRC solution, or what are some of the options there? And I think you touched on it in your response, but maybe to clarify.
Yeah, so regarding kind of like authoritative sources and some of the other content, so out of the box, if you just do a clean install, no demo data, nothing like that, The answer is, you wouldn't have it by default, but definitely, look into the licensing piece. But we do have some easy to install use case accelerators. Some of these are provided by, they're all in our store. Some of these are provided by the ServiceNow team. Others, from our valuable partners such as Edgile, Thomson Reuters. We all have. There's a lot of use case accelerators and content packs, other helpful material for almost any use case you can think of that may be beneficial for your compliance teams. Just to list a few, we have one for the CIS, cybersecurity controls. We have GDPR content, NIST, CSF, RMF, cybersecurity controls accelerator for tech controls. And there's so many more beyond that, but just to rattle off a few there. By using those use case accelerators, that'll bring in things such as control objectives, which are our control templates for scaling controls, giving you those authority documents and the underlying requirements or citations. And you'll often have some relationships when those come in. So you'll know what authority document they're for. And if they bring in those control templates, you'll have linkages between those control objectives to their underlying requirements or citations. Jay, did I cover both of them there?
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay. So we will move to the next section, and we'll make sure to cover all the other Q&A sections or questions during the Q&A section. I promise we won't miss anything. Okay. So the next section we wanted to talk about is how RegTech is impacting risk and compliance management. And Mike, as compliance programs mature, we're seeing that organizations are looking to technology to help. And ServiceNow obviously is very valuable, but RegTech also can play a large part in their maturity journey. What insights can you share from your most recent survey?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So, as we've established, RegTech is seen as a positive initiative, and there are a number of indicators that evidence how RegTech is impacting risk and compliance management. I will cover 4 of them here. So, firstly, the applications for the use of RegTech are ever expanding. This slide actually might be a little too small for the screen, but let me run through the main points. It was taken from the FinTech, RegTech, and Role of Compliance report for the most recent one, 2023, and identified a widening range of compliance and risk management applications that RegTech has impacted, and that is a list of them there on that chart. The main ones on the chart are financial crime. This includes anti-money laundering and sanctions checking, cyber resilience, and data capture. But as we've seen, there's an ever-increasing number of subject matters that compliance officers are having to get to grips with. Secondly, we're seeing time savings. In this year's Cost of Compliance report, we found that 62% of respondents reported that in an average week, they spend between 1 and 7 hours tracking and analysing regulatory developments. Now, I know this has been slightly contradicted by the poll question, which suggests that people are taking longer, which is fine. But this is what the Cost of Compliance report this year said. So 62% for this year, for 2023. Last year, it was 73%. So 73% of respondents reported that in an average week, they spend between 1 and 7 hours tracking and analysing regulatory developments. This reduction could be attributable to the more widespread use of RegTech solutions for tracking regulations. FinTech, RegTech, and the Role of Compliance survey reported that 50% of respondents had implemented a RegTech solution or had done so in some part, and this was up from 38% in 2021. So another indicator that the use of RegTech is becoming more popular. Thirdly, the survey showed that risk and compliance functions' involvement in their firm's approach to FinTech and RegTech has increased. This represents advantages for compliance functions, and it raises the compliance's profile at board level. And the FinTech RegTech survey reported that more boards were getting involved with the firm's approach to FinTech and RegTech and that some boards were actually having to upskill as part of that. And so, as we all know, compliance, getting in front of senior management and having an influence is a very difficult thing to do. If RegTech can be used as a vehicle to do that, then it's all the better. And finally, I also think that a strong implementation of a RegTech solution improves a firm's approach to risk management. Now, for many firms, the introduction of RegTech is a big decision. Let's not beat about the bush. There are a number of reasons for whether this is lack of budget or poor legacy IT infrastructure or lack of individual expertise. But mature firms will assess those risks of implementing the RegTech solution and look to mitigate them where required. So I think from a technological point of view, RegTech is becoming more popular, more applications being used, more reasons and more involvement from compliance functions. So generally a very positive picture, I would say. So we come on to recommendations for success, and I think I'll take a few of these. I think Jay, you're going to chip in as well, but let me start. So my recommendations would be to plan thoroughly, identify the precise process you wish to operate, and ensure that it takes on board all stakeholders, getting involvement from all those who are involved with the Horizon tracking process or whatever RegTech process you're implementing, proves that, makes it easier, shall I say, for them to understand what they're doing at the end of the process. So get them involved at an early stage. Adopt an integrated, embedded system that is easy to operate and provides simple and straightforward outputs. The easier the system is to operate, the easier people will use it, especially when you're dealing with operational management or senior management, where this might be only a small part of their day-to-day responsibilities. I'm just going to reinforce what both Jay and Brian have said previously in this presentation, in that I think that firms who actually take time to integrate RegTech solutions with wider corporate systems and processes actually benefit more from the application and see greater benefits generally. And finally, I think there's a couple of governance pieces here. So I think firstly, identify and iron out any gaps or interdependencies that may cause the process to fail, and then try to mitigate them again at an earlier stage as possible. And then from a governance perspective, make sure the governance around the application is sound. Have clear ownership, have clear responsibilities, provide some assurance over the accuracy and completeness of the data, make sure outputs are timely and accurate, and maintain management information on the effectiveness of the system, and make sure that's promulgated to those that need to know at committee or senior management level. Jay, I think you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, just to add on to that. So, we recommend a crawl, walk, run mentality as you start to mature this process. I think everyone wants to get to the point where they're able to ingest the near real-time regulatory intelligence feeds and are really running a Horizon regulatory compliance program. But that takes time to mature and to build the right foundations and make sure that you're able to ingest and manage through those changes as they're published. Recommend leveraging content offerings like Thomson Reuters, Edgile's automated regulatory compliance content subscription, because they can help accelerate your program definition, reduce the internal manual efforts. I think we had a question around how do we start to bring this in from a risk perspective as well. The Edgile content brings some of that as well. So you've got risk and compliance, acknowledging that those are two sides of the same coin most times within a program. And then lastly, be mindful of the organizational change impacts as you start to ingest and operationalize these regulatory changes. From a control owner perspective, the folks on the first line, they've got a day-to-day job. And if we're changing the target state of maturity for them on a weekly basis, monthly basis, that can be very difficult for the broader organization to manage through and can disrupt your overall business operations if not done in a careful and measured way. I think on the next slide is our last kind of slide of content here around key takeaways. So the first is really around the volume of regulatory material is expected to rise. I think we've all seen that recently, that with each new privacy breach or control failure that makes the news, there's 3 new regulations coming out on the other end of that, and they're usually with a short ramp-up time for compliance. So that can really start to overwhelm the organization, but there are options to help go through that. And I think, Mike, the last 2 are how you start to chip through that.
Yeah, well, RegTech solutions gaining in popularity. I hope that we've proven that out and about people are seeing that the benefits of RegTech solutions and are starting to introduce them within their own firms. I suppose there's 2 things to this. There's not only the popularity and the benefits and values that people are seeing, but there's also the range of applications that RegTech solutions are being used for. I mean, in a compliance field, there's anti-money laundering checks, there's sanctions checking, there is horizon scanning, there is compliance monitoring applications. The list goes on, and to be honest with you, these RegTech solutions should be aimed at helping the compliance officer undertaking his job and making it more efficient for him to do so. And then embed your regulatory tracking solutions across the organization. Again, I think Jay and I have mentioned this, and Brian actually, when in his spectrum slide, have as a crucial element of when you're introducing a reg tracking solution. It is not just for the compliance department, or at least it shouldn't be. To get maximum benefit from these solutions, you really need to aim them at the end user, and that includes operational management and others within the firm, and that requires an embedded solution for regulatory tracking across the organization. Again, difficult to do, but that, in my opinion, is how you get maximum benefit from that.
All right, thank you. I think that will move us into our open Q&A, and big thank you to everyone that's been putting questions in the Q&A section. As promised, we'll go through the remaining ones here. And just as a time check, we have about 10 minutes to go through these. So the very first one that came through in the chat, and Jay, I think I'd like to start with you, and then maybe I can chime in as well. We received a question about, and they said, once we feed multiple authoritative sources using, it could be a provider such as Thomson Reuters or one of the other ones that we mentioned, how can they establish a unified risk-based controls framework from that?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I think there's a couple of options there for an organization that's doesn't have a defined risk taxonomy today and are really starting from the ground up, leveraging a content offering like Edgile's regulatory compliance solution has both the risk and the compliance element covered. So you're given corresponding control objectives and risk statements to really build out that entire integrated risk and compliance program. That said, a lot of our clients already have a risk taxonomy that they've been using for years, they're very happy with, and really it becomes an exercise of linking those different control objectives that are coming in from Thomson Reuters and Edgile and others to that existing framework. And you can do that in ServiceNow through some linkages that exist natively in the architecture. So once you've gone through that kind of one-time exercise, your new regulatory content maps into the control objectives. You've already defined that linkage between the control objectives and risk statements, and you'll have that integrated risk and compliance view for your program. So it kind of depends on where you are in your journey, but there are a few options.
Oh yeah, I think you pretty much covered everything I was going to say. Only thing I would add is, there's other options as well. If it's something such as UCF or other paid providers, where that kind of brings in the idea of they've done some of the legwork in the communication with regulators, authoritative sources, and it kind of gives you the linkages without some of the work, and that confidently you can test once, comply many for a lot of your controls. So
can I just chime in for one second? I think it's very important. I agree with everything you guys have said. Very, very, very wise words. But I think it's also at the early stage important to be clear about responsibilities. So whether it be risks, or whether it be control objectives or whatever, somebody within the organization, generally not the second line, but somebody in the organization has to own those. And to get that clear early doors, especially if you're just starting out, will save you a heck of a lot of time as you move through implementing your risk frameworks and risk cultures.
Thank you. So I think I'll start with, this is going to be for both of you, but I'll throw it to Jay first. So we got the question, what do you think organizations should be keeping an eye on for the future?
Yeah, I think understanding that the aperture for regulatory compliance is increasing. And by that, I mean, traditionally, a lot of folks have been focused on it from a information technology, information security perspective. Maybe they've been looking at it from an operational compliance perspective, but we're starting to see new domains such as ESG, environmental social governance regulations being published. I think being mindful in that a lot of these regulations start to apply to your third and fourth parties. So these need to be accounted for in your vendor risk, third party risk management programs. So compliance is a broad topic that applies to a lot of your business, and starting to recognize that the aperture is increasing as new regulations are coming, which means that you need to set those foundations, have those processes, the roles and responsibilities that Mike has been speaking of defined, so the organization can respond when those come up. So, Mike, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add there.
No, completely agree with your third party point. I think that's this from this side of the pond. It's been a big area that isn't taken seriously. But as you quite rightly say, Jay, a lot of the regulations that firms take responsibility for, they also take responsibility for their outsourced providers and suppliers as well. So a big area that I think is coming up. ESG, absolutely, can't add anything more to that. In fact, I think Brian had hit many of the hot topics in his opening slide to the webinar. But I think in the States they are changing the way that securities are traded, and this will hit compliance departments as policies, procedures, technology, and disclosures need to be adapted. In the UK, they're progressing its post-Brexit agenda with a wide-ranging review of regulations under the Edinburgh reforms. And I suppose as a footnote, and something that I suppose we can't ignore, is in financial services, my field. The events of Credit Suisse and Silicon Valley Bank have prompted regulators to now go back to the desk and to review the regulations that were meant to have prevented the collapse of these firms. And so there will be things undoubtedly come out about changes that compliance officers have to deal with around this issue.
All right, and Jay, I've got one for you. So you work with a lot of customers in your day-to-day. How do you help them get started quickly? And I know you touched on that a little bit earlier, but if you could expand on it a bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as mentioned earlier, our team is solely focused on ServiceNow's risk and security operations solutions. And as part of that, we've developed a number of what we call quick start implementations. And they're really designed to get you incremental quick wins, recognizing you need to demonstrate value to your management and leaders within the organization. Most of these take between 8 and 10 weeks and get you up and running with the integrated risk and compliance solutions, the ability to do control testing, attestations and surveys to your control owners, and really getting you reports on the other end that can show the value of your program internally and hopefully increase your resourcing and funding as necessary. So we've got those, and they pair nicely with our regulatory content. So we help you build out the risk and control frameworks, understanding where those apply within your organization, and really get you ready to hit the ground running in, say, 10 weeks' time.
We actually had a new
here,
question.
maybe. Oh, please.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, just saw a new one come through in the chat, and I'll open it to both of you, and if not, maybe I can hop in. But so we were asked, how can we integrate generative AI to GRC? I know it's a hot topic right now with all things ChatGPT and some of the other solutions out there in the market. But any thoughts from either of you on that?
Yeah, I'll say kind of at a high level, I know ServiceNow has a big focus in the coming years on AI ML, so artificial intelligence, machine learning capabilities, predictive intelligence within the solution. So some of that will be native on the platform that you can leverage to say, oh, we've seen this issue before. How did we treat it? How did we respond to it? And going through that process to make sure that we're identifying. And then start to look at, do we need to integrate with external services? There's certainly capabilities to do that. I think depending on your specific use case would dictate, what makes sense for that organization. So without knowing more details, it's hard to be a little more specific.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add. I think Jay's covered my points. I think he's right. I think it's all about it's getting a fuller picture of the risk. It's getting a fuller picture of the precedent behind the regulatory event that comes in, and it's about an easier way of doing that. But to get to the end goal there, it isn't straightforward at the moment, shall we say?
Yeah, definitely. That's what I'm seeing on my end. I know it's definitely going to be part of the roadmap and some future integrations. I've seen some things in our partner ecosystem, some cool use cases where people are using prompts like ChatGPT, other services to generate risk statements. But definitely very exciting, and looking forward to seeing what else is in the pipeline for that. Okay, quick time check. Looks like we have 1 more minute. I think I'm going to throw this over to Mike. From your survey, what would you say was your biggest surprise from all the data?
Okay, thanks, Brian. Yeah, so the biggest surprise, well, I think the results around volume of regulations and costs and operational difficulties were all very interesting, and but to be honest with you, not a real surprise. The one thing that I will mention, however, is the emergence of low staff morale as a risk for firms. So if you apply this to a compliance department, it may be a sign that increased workloads resulting from the increased volume of regulatory change that we've mentioned are showing pressures on staff. So when asked what was their biggest risk, respondents came back with low staff morale. It wasn't the top one, but it was third or fourth, and we've not seen it in the survey before, in fairness. So the challenges for compliance staff, and I'll focus on compliance department for now, coupled with difficulties in obtaining skilled resource and tightening budgets, all might mean that there is more onus on firms and compliance officers to be innovative while still being prudent, of course, and to use other alternatives available to them, like technology, to achieve their objectives may well be the best way. Because, as I say, the survey threw out that actually low staff morale within firms was increasing.
All right, thank you so much. So that's going to be a wrap for our Q&A. Before we break, just a few reminders that we have a lot of on-demand webinars, and you can check them out, on demand at your convenience at the link shown here. Also a reminder that Knowledge is coming up in Las Vegas, May 14th through 18th of this year. Scan that QR code to get some more information on that. And lastly, we've recently had our Utah release broadcast. So for more information about learning about the latest and greatest with the Utah release, if you want to catch that broadcast again, there's a QR code there to get that information. I think that does it for our prepared remarks in the Q&A. Thank you so much for everyone's time. I think there's a video that's going to be shown here, but thank you, everyone.